Texas while they sat in their favorite corner booth at the Rendezvous Pub. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and the heavy bass of a disco track playing on the jukebox. "You see, Jeanne," Jack said, waving a greasy breadstick for emphasis like a conductor's baton, "it's purely biological. Throughout history, men have been the hunters, the protectors, the ones who face the wild beasts and the saber-toothed tigers while the women stay in the cave and, well, they decorate the walls and keep the fire going. It's in the genes. Is that so?" Jonna asked, her voice dangerously calm as she took a sip of her white wine. "And what wild beasts have you faced lately, Jack? Aside from a stubborn sofa or a particularly aggressive spider in the bathtub." "It's the potential," Jack insisted, puffing out his chest. "If a threat appeared, I would be your shield. I am the watchdog of apartment 201. I am the man of the house." As if summoned by his sheer arrogance, the threat appeared. A man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in grease-stained denim swaggered over to their table. He was a mountain of a man, with a beard that could hide a small family of squirrels and eyes that spoke of many bar fights won and very few books read. "Hey, Blondie," the giant growled, leaning so close to Chrissy that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "How about you and me go for a ride on my hog? I got a seat that'll make you forget all about this little runt you're sitting with." Jack's protector instinct took a sudden, violent vacation. He looked at the man's fist, which was roughly the size of a toaster, and felt his knees turn to jelly. The man of the house was suddenly feeling very much like a boy in a basement. "Excuse me," Jack squeaked, his voice cracking. We're in the middle of a very important discussion about floral arrangements and the economy." The giant sneered, looking Jack up and down with utter contempt. "Shut up, Tinkerbell. I'm talking to the lady. You just sit there and keep your hair pretty." Jack looked at Jonna. He looked at Chrissy, who was looking at him with wide, terrified eyes. Then he looked at his beer. He sat down and became very, very interested in the condensation on his glass. The giant laughed, a booming, mocking sound that shook the glasses on the table, and finally wandered off when he realized Chrissy was too terrified to even look at him. The walk home was silent and heavy. Jack felt the weight of his cowardice like a lead cloak. He spent the next day in a state of deep depression, refusing to even put on his chef's hat or look at a frying pan. "I'm a coward," Jack moaned, lying face down on the sofa, his voice muffled by a cushion. "I have the backbone of a chocolate eclair. I'm a disgrace to the uniform." Jack, he was huge. Chrissy said, trying to be supportive. He was like a building with legs. He would have crushed you into a little Jack pancake. "That's not the point. I didn't even try. I'm yellow, Jonna. I've got chicken soup in my veins instead of blood." But Jonna would had a plan. She knew that in the world of sitcom living, Reputation was often more important than reality. The next night, they returned to the pub. But this time, Jonna and Chrissy began a loud, strategic conversation within earshot of the regular crowd and, more importantly, within earshot of the giant. Oh, poor Jack, Jonna sighed, her voice carrying across the bar like a stage whisper. He's so brave, but that war injury, it's so tragic. That 6-inch steel plate they had to put in his head after the explosion in the DMZ. It makes him so unstable. I know, Chrissy added, catching on with surprising speed. The doctors say if anyone hits him, he just snaps. He loses all sense of civilized behavior. Remember that time in the jungle when he took out an entire battalion with nothing but a grapefruit spoon and a very angry look. The giant, who had been gearing up for another round of bullying, paused. He looked at Jack, who was currently staring intensely and somewhat menacingly at a bowl of pretzels. The idea of a man with a steel plate and a deadly spoon was enough to give even a mountain pause. When Jack finally stood up, his legs shaking, but his face set in a grim mask, and offered a shaky, "Is there a problem here, friend?" The giant actually backed away, his hands raised in surrender. "No problem, man, no problem at all. Just nice weather we're having, right? I was just leaving. Important meeting. With my mother." The giant scrambled out of the pub, leaving the regulars staring in awe. Jack sat back down, a hero by proxy and a legend in the making. "I guess I really told him, didn't I? You were terrifying, Jack." Jonna smiled, winking at Chrissy. "You were a real animal." Chapter 6. The Great Rent Heist. The month drew to a close with the inevitable terror that haunted every renter in the city. Rent day. $300, a staggering sum for 3 young people working entry-level jobs, had been painstakingly collected and placed in a crisp white envelope marked rent in bold, black letters. It sat on the shelf next to the small transistor radio, a beacon of financial responsibility in a world of impulse buys. But when the time came to hand it over to Stanley, the shelf was empty. "It's gone," Jonna wailed, her hands flying to her face. The money, the radio, the sense of security, everything. "We've been hit," Jack shouted, grabbing a rolling pin from the kitchen drawer. "Burglars, in broad daylight, while we were probably out buying bread." The apartment became a crime scene. They called the police, and soon a weary-looking officer was standing in their living room, taking notes with a look of profound disbelief. He looked like he had seen 1,000 stolen rent envelopes in his career. "So you're telling me," the officer said, his voice flat, "that you left $300 in cash in an envelope clearly labeled rent on an open shelf next to an unlocked door in the middle of a major metropolitan area?" It sounded like a very transparent and honest system at the time. Chrissy sniffed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Look, kid," the officer sighed. "Nobody's that stupid. This looks like an inside job, or a very lazy insurance scam, or maybe you just spent it on a disco suit and got cold feet. The roommates were